I once saved Diana's life, and even gave her all I had when she was down and out. But after I was seriously injured in an accident, she abandoned me at the foot of the mountain. She held on her fiancé, crying as if her life was hanging by a thread. However, what is ridiculous is that at a banquet, she announced to everyone in a high-profile manner, "The groom at the wedding in 2 months will be me." All eyes were on me, a country bumpkin who had been abandoned by her and regarded as a joke. But she didn't know that in the last month of my life, I just wanted to live for myself. Hi everyone, thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share. If you like this story, please let me know in the comment section. I will update the next part. Diana, the proud eldest daughter of the Beijing Circle, and I am the country boy who once tried his best to save her. Back then, she collapsed at the foot of the mountain in Lushan town. I used my meager savings to treat her injuries and stayed up all night to take care of her, just to let her stand up and return to her own world. But she went back to the bright lights and feasting. But he abandoned me without hesitation. That time, I fell down at the foot of the mountain seriously injured. She mercilessly supported her fiancé, who had only sprained his foot, her face full of anxiety, as if his life was hanging by a thread. And me? She just glanced at me coldly, without even saying thank you. Later, I lost my memory, and the only thing left in my memory was a person named Diana. She was the girl I wanted to protect for my whole life, gentle and kind, and she belonged only to me. However, fate was like a cruel joke. She appeared in front of me again, crying and saying that she was my Diana. I didn't believe it. The Diana in my memory would not leave me in the mud indifferently, nor would she stand next to my fiancé and look at me with such eyes. Humiliation at the banquet. That day, I was invited to a banquet attended by many noble families. When I stood in the middle of the hall in my swimming trunks, malicious whispers were heard all around me. Isn't this the country bumpkin who saved Diana when she was down and out? I heard he was born with bad luck and brought bad luck to his parents. Now he has come all the way to Kyoto. He really doesn't know his place. He came to the party in swimming trunks. It's a joke. With his status, he still wants to compete with Michael? Even if he works hard, he is just an ugly duckling. How can he become a phoenix? The discussions were getting louder and louder. I stood there and let their eyes look me up and down from head to toe, as if they were examining a piece of cheap merchandise. At the end of the hall, Michael was holding a glass of red wine with a meaningful smile on his face. He stood high above me, as if the entire banquet was just to watch me make a fool of myself. His eyes were full of ridicule and contempt, as if to say, "Why do you, a piece of trash like you, stand here?" I looked around, but I didn't see Diana. This party was a trap set by Michael. I was furious and turned to leave, but was stopped by a few lackeys. Whine and sarcasm. "Don't leave in such a hurry. Our Michael still has something to say to you," a bodyguard said with a wry smile while pressing my shoulders hard. Michael picked up a bottle of red wine and walked slowly to me. He looked down at me, as if he had pity for me. "What a pity! Your face, TSK, may have been acceptable before, but what about now?" He deliberately pressed the bottom of the bottle against my face, gently stroking the scar that stretched from the end of my eye to my earlobe. "It's ruined, completely ruined." Before he finished speaking, he smashed the bottle on my head. The sound of glass breaking mixed with the coolness of red wine. The wine dripped down my hair, and my vision became blurred due to the pain. Michael's voice came through clearly. "With your worthless life, you still want to get close to Diana? She's willing to let you run errands for her. That's already a great blessing. Don't dream. You're not worthy of her, and you're not worthy of this circle." The lie from 3 days ago. I try to keep calm and clench my fists. 3 days ago, Michael told me that Diana would return home today and attend his pool party. If I wanted to see her, I had to put on my swimming trunks. I knew it was illogical, but I did it anyway in order to see her. I have waited for this meeting for half a year, running from my hometown to Kyoto, just to let her give me a clear answer. If she has really given up on me, then I will let it go completely. But now it seems that this was just Michael's malicious plan. He didn't need any reason to play me in his hands. Michael waved his hand, and several bodyguards immediately pushed me to the ground. He picked up the broken bottle, lifted my chin with the sharp edge, and forced me to look directly into his eyes. "I heard that you saved Diana's life and almost went blind." His tone was full of mockery. "What happened? SK, look at this little face, what a pity. You were injured and sentenced to 1 month's detention. I feel sad when I hear that. Don't blame Diana. After all, you almost went blind and were disfigured. In her eyes, it's not as important as a sprained ankle. Do you understand?" You are worthless. I took a deep breath and tried to calm down the anger in my heart, but the humiliation made it impossible for me to calm down. I raised my head and looked at Michael with cold eyes. Michael, do you know what is truly not worth it? I said in a low voice, but with a force that no one could ignore. It's you who think you are so high and mighty who are not worth it. You look good on the outside, but you are rotten on the inside. Just like this bottle of red wine, no matter how gorgeously it is packaged, it will only turn into stinky water when it is spilled. The hall fell silent instantly, and everyone looked at me in disbelief. They probably never thought that a lowly countryman would dare to contradict Michael like this. You're quite tough. Michael sneered and kicked me. A year ago, I started having severe headaches from time to time for unknown reasons. Now, the bottle of red wine that Michael smashed made my headache worse, as if it was about to explode. I endured the piercing pain and tried to recall the things he just mentioned, but my memory seemed to be covered by a layer of fog. After thinking for a while, I vaguely remembered that the incident did happen not long after I came to Kyoto. That was the first time I escaped from Diana's mountain villa. On the way, I met Michael. I didn't know his identity at that time. While pretending to care about me, he pushed me when I was not paying attention. I rolled down the hill, covered in blood, and he accidentally fell, creating the illusion that we both stumbled. Later, Diana arrived, and without hesitation, she carried Michael, who had sprained his ankle, and left me, who was already dying. I still remember the indifference in her eyes at that moment. If Lima from the villa hadn't rushed to save me, I would have become a one-eyed dragon. I just wondered why Michael pushed me down the mountain on purpose, but I was the one who ended up in jail. This mystery has always troubled me, but my memory is fragmented and I can't find the answer. As I was thinking, suddenly a strong force pushed me into the swimming pool next to me. The cold water instantly enveloped me. I struggled desperately, but I couldn't swim. After a few strokes, I choked on the water, my consciousness blurred, and everything in front of my eyes was dark. Back to the villa. When I woke up, I found myself back in Diana's villa on the hillside. This scene was not unfamiliar at all. Even though I knew it was a hangmen banquet, I was still willing to look for her again and again, whether it was for an answer or to give an explanation to my past self. 3 hours is the longest time I can stay in this villa. I know very well that she will not let me stay, but my obsession makes me come back again and again. First meeting Diana. I first met Diana 5 years ago. My life was filled with darkness from the beginning. My mother died of complications during childbirth, and my father was a deaf mute who worked hard to raise me, but he died of illness when I was in my first year of high school. The family was left with only a shabby house and a few thousand yuan in savings. I used the money to barely finish high school, and after graduation I started working during the day and setting up shop at night markets at night, living on my own. Although Lushan town is small, it is an ancient town with mountains and water, and the environment is quiet. That night, I closed my stall and went home. When I passed the foot of the mountain near my home, I found a disheveled man lying on the ground. She was covered in wounds and her face was dirty, as if she had rolled down a mountain. When I first saw her, her tattered clothes and disheveled appearance reminded me of the crowing of a rooster when fleeing famine. I wanted to pretend I didn't see it and walk away, but as I took a step, her hand grabbed my ankle. Her lips opened and closed slightly. Her voice was so weak that it was almost inaudible, but her eyes showed a strong desire to survive. I clearly read 2 words from her eyes: save me. Found a trouble. I don't know whether it was out of pity or some inexplicable intuition, but I, who never meddle in other people's business, took her home. After a simple wash, I discovered the beauty of her face buried under the dirt. At that moment, I was so shocked that I could hardly take my eyes away. This woman was not only beautiful, but even so beautiful that it seemed unreal. After she woke up, her peach blossom eyes stared at me straight, as if carrying some kind of natural charm. She didn't say anything, but just looked at me with confusion and helplessness, which made me feel uncomfortable. I asked her what her name was, and she shook her head, as if she had lost her memory. I helplessly looked at the jade pendant on her neck, which had the word smoke engraved on it. So I casually said, "Then I'll call you Diana." From that day on, my peaceful life was completely disrupted. Expensive rescue. Diana's injuries were much more serious than I thought. 2 broken ribs and a fractured leg. Although I didn't have much savings, I still gritted my teeth and took out the money I had saved for my exams to ask the most famous Chinese medicine doctor in town, Uncle Liang, to treat her. Diana seemed very grateful to me, always looking at me with a loving look. And every night when it was quiet, I looked at the half-empty money jar, and I always felt a little complicated. I knew saving her was the right choice, but I couldn't help but feel distressed. Maybe I really made the mistake that all men in the world make, being tempted by beauty. A strange day. Diana gradually recovered her health, and her laughter became more common in the house. She was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, even prettier than the actresses on TV. I often secretly looked at her, thinking that this was the reward I deserved for the money I spent. One day, when I was secretly staring at her, she suddenly raised her head, smiled, and lifted my chin with her hand. "Hey, have you seen enough?" Then she blew me a kiss and teased me. "Boy, this is not free." My face turned red as fire, and I ran out of the room in a panic, but her clear laughter rang out behind me. From the day Diana moved into my home, my life was completely changed. Her arrival brought a little color to my lonely world and made me understand what it means to be moved for the first time. Her injuries were too severe to allow her to get out of bed, and even her daily washing and dressing had to be done by me. Before my father passed away, I was responsible for all the big and small matters at home, and these tasks were easy for me. Although there are differences between men and women, I didn't think it was a big deal because special circumstances should be treated specially. On the contrary, she blushed and was shy at first, but compared to actually pooping on the bed, she chose to compromise. Every morning, she would see me off with a pair of expectant eyes, and every night when I opened the door, her sparkling peach blossom eyes would appear in front of me on time. Such warm days made me gradually forget the fatigue of life. Her illness was finally cured when she had drained me of all my energy, and she was finally able to walk slowly. But she quickly became my little tail again, following me wherever I went. In her little world where she had lost her memories, I seemed to be everything to her. It was one of the rare peaceful and happy times in my life. Diana's little vinegar jar. I don't know what's wrong with Liang Xiao Xiao, the owner of the stall next door, but he actually fell in love with me. One day, she came downstairs to my house and publicly expressed her love to me. She even thought of a name for our future child. My last name is Liang, and yours is Gao. If we have a daughter, we'll name her Gao Yang, which means that the family will have enough food and clothing. How perfect! I was stunned on the spot, and before I could respond, Diana rushed down from upstairs angrily and scolded Liang Xiao Xiao in front of her. Although she appears gentle as water on weekdays, she is very ruthless when scolding people, and every word she says is sharp. Liang Xiao Xiao fled on the spot. From then on, every time Diana saw Liang Xiao Xiao, she would always trip her up. One day, she suddenly grabbed my collar and asked me with red eyes, "William, will you choose her or me as your wife?" I was stunned for a moment and answered subconsciously, "Of course I choose you." The anger on her face disappeared instantly, and a smug smile appeared on the corner of her mouth. Then from today on, I am your Diana. At that moment, she completely lived in my heart. Tulips and headaches. The morning sun shines into the room, and the sea of tulips outside the window is particularly bright. Aunt Lee pushed the door open and saw me leaning against the bed in a daze. She immediately smiled and said, "The young lady specially airlifted the tulips from the Netherlands because she said you like them. If you don't go out today, you can see them in full bloom at noon." I frowned slightly. "I like tulips. Why don't you remember?" Motherly was stunned for a moment, then sighed. "If you don't want to remember, don't remember it. Just think about it in your heart." I really don't remember it, not out of anger. Although my memory is vague, the flowers outside the window are indeed beautiful and enchanting. I stood up and tried to get a closer look, but as soon as I stood up, I felt dizzy and almost fell down. Motherly helped me sit down and took out her phone to call a doctor. I shook my head to stop her. "It's okay. It's very hot during the dog days of summer. I was hit on the head and fell into the water recently. I don't think my body can handle it for a while. I'll be fine after a good night's sleep." Seeing that I insisted, she said nothing more. As soon as I lay down, I felt very sleepy and fell asleep as soon as I tilted my head. Farewell in a dream. The scene that emerged in the dream was when she left. That time, Diana would disappear for a few days every month. As the day of separation approached, her disappearance time became longer and longer, from a few days to more than 10 days, and even more than 20 days. She never explained it, but I vaguely sensed that she had recovered her memory. The day before she left, she hugged me tightly. The force was as if it was trying to suffocate me, as if it was afraid of losing me. This abnormality made me feel uneasy. Can I not go? I asked her in a low voice. She buried her head in the crook of my neck, her voice low and firm. My mother's death cannot be forgotten like this. And I must take back those things that originally belonged to me. William, just wait for me at home. I will definitely pick you up. She raised her head, her eyes full of anticipation. When I succeed, we will get married. I want to hold a wedding of the century so that everyone can witness our love. I looked at her and whispered, I don't care about the wedding of the century, as long as the two of them are happy. But I know that my Diana is not a dog in the mountains. She is a phoenix flying in the sky. The phoenix will eventually return to the sky where it belongs, and I can only be the soil behind her. Suppressing the uneasiness in my heart, I forced a smile. Okay, I'll wait for you. She left for 2 years. At first, she would still call me, and her voice was like a thin thread that held my life in check. Later, her calls became less and less frequent until she was completely disconnected. I even wondered if she had forgotten me or didn't want to remember me anymore. However, just when I was about to give up, Aunt Lee suddenly showed up with a few black-clad bodyguards and took me from the town to the villa halfway up the mountain. I live there now. Strange woman by the bed. When I woke up, it was already the next morning. As soon as I opened my eyes, I saw a woman sitting by the bed, with her arms folded, looking at me quietly. Remain a virgin for my Diana. So I sat up suddenly, but because I moved too quickly, I felt a wave of nausea in my chest. I quickly crawled to the bed and started to dry heave. The woman panicked when she saw this and rushed to the door and called for help. Doctor, doctor, come quickly. After a while, the doctor and Aunt Lee came in. Seeing the familiar Aunt Lee, I felt a little relieved, but when the woman tried to get close to me, I immediately became alert again, retching and shrinking behind Aunt Lee. Seeing this, Aunt Lee couldn't help but smile and said softly, Master William, this is the young lady. Miss? Diana? I was stunned for a moment and looked carefully at the woman in front of me. Her brows were tightly knitted, but she still managed a stiff smile and said patiently, William, I'm Diana. Did you just wake up and feel confused? I won't mistake Diana. Diana? I glanced at her and then curled my lips. You are Diana, not Diana. How could I not recognize my Diana? When she heard what I said, the smile on her face disappeared instantly, but I ignored her and continued to complain. Didn't you say you would be back next month? Why did you come back today? If I had known yesterday, I would not have gone out. Your fiancé almost beat me to death and wanted to drown me. I felt a little proud when I said this. I was letting her know how much trouble she had caused me and warning her not to deceive me again. I am not that easy to fool. Seeing that she was still silent, I sighed and pretended to sigh. How could I forget Diana? He only has me. If I forget about him, he will get angry with me again. He is a tough guy, and he is bolder than anyone else when he flirts with me, but his eyes turn red when I get upset. I can see through his little tricks. After saying that, I gave her a meaningful look and said, Diana, you can't learn this little trick. Unfortunately, she actually imitated me very well. At this moment, her eyes were red, and she stared at me without saying a word, so quiet that it made me feel uneasy. I was calm inside, and even thought about asking the kitchen to make a braised chicken with rice for lunch. Doctor's diagnosis. In the end, she said nothing, but called for a doctor to come and examine me. I have always been afraid of needles and medicine, so I avoided the serious issues and tried to downplay the uncomfortable symptoms. Although Lima usually took care of me, she was not with me every moment. The doctor frowned after hearing this and gave a diagnosis. You may have a mild concussion, and the heat has entered your body, causing your body to be weak. Drink more mung bean soup and bayberry soup, rest well, and you will slowly recover. When I heard that I didn't need injections or medication, I immediately breathed a sigh of relief and said in a very serious manner, Okay, I'll drink mung bean soup and bayberry soup every morning and evening. Don't worry, doctor. Diana was worried, so she followed the doctor out and asked about my condition in a low voice in the corridor. Her concern made me speechless. After all, this was just a small matter, and it was not something that would cause me any trouble. After my dizziness gradually subsided, I changed my clothes and went downstairs to have breakfast. As soon as I sat down, Diana came and her eyes were fixed on me, which was so complicated that it made my scalp tingle. She finally spoke. William, I am Diana. I lowered my head and took a big bite of the dough stick, not wanting to pay attention to her. But she kept on pestering me, and her voice got louder. Look at me, look carefully. I look exactly like Diana. How could I not be? Her voice was filled with imperceptible anxiety, even a little aggrieved. I finally put down the bowl, looked up at her, and sneered. My Diana doesn't have a fiancé. When she heard this, her expression froze for a moment, as if I had touched on something. The Yandra drama. She became more and more anxious as she spoke, and seemed a little out of control, and she jerked the stool towards me. At that moment, my heart nearly jumped out of my throat. I quickly leaned back to try to create some distance, but the two burly men behind me were prepared. They held down my shoulders and pushed me back to my original position. The man in front of me had a face full of madness and persistence, which made my scalp numb. I couldn't help but think of the recently popular Yandra literature. This kind of eyes and this kind of aura are simply the template of Yandra. I swallowed nervously, and a layer of cold sweat oozed from my back. Her vision finally returned to some rationality from the confusion, and seeing the obvious fear on my face, she seemed to realize that she had gone too far. She took a deep breath and blinked, trying to calm down, then said in a slow tone, "William, take a good look at me again." Her face carefully. Her facial features were exactly the same as Diana's, but her eyes and temperament were completely different people. I sniffed and said with a sad face, "Although you look the same, you are really not Diana. I don't want to lie. Please don't force me." Cowardly stubbornness. As soon as I said this, I couldn't help but burst into tears. This person in front of me is not a good person. In order to scare me not to run away, she had deliberately let me witness his methods. Those torture scenes are now engraved in my mind and can't be erased at all. Although I didn't piss myself, it was almost the same. But even so, I still didn't want to lie. If Diana knew that I admitted that someone else was her, she would be so angry that she would flip my quilt off. Diana looked at me quietly, and suddenly, her eyes turned red. Her voice was low and restrained. "William, you're Diana. What's her last name?" This question stumped me. I was stunned for a few seconds, then cried even harder. How should I know? He has lost his memory and can't even remember his own name. Anyway, her name is Diana. You are not her. You are Michael's fiancé. Why do you always have to be my Diana? Crying and silence. Diana's throat seemed to be blocked by something, and she couldn't make a sound for a long time. He closed his eyes, sighed deeply, and 2 lines of tears slid down his eyes. He raised his hand as if he wanted to touch my head, but finally put it down. "Okay." His voice was so low that it was almost inaudible. "I won't force you anymore. Just eat your meal." After saying that, he turned and left the villa. In fact, he didn't live here, he just came here once a month. But this time, his departure seemed heavier than before, as if he took away something I couldn't explain. Unexpected visitors. The days returned to a brief calm. A few days later, I sat in the rocking chair in the bedroom, leisurely looking at the sea of tulips outside the window, thinking about what to eat for lunch. At this moment, the door was suddenly opened roughly. I frowned and turned around to see that the person who broke in was Michael. He had a gloomy face, and it was obvious that he was not here to reminisce about the past. Motherly followed behind, trying to stop him. "Master Michael, you are a reasonable person. It is not appropriate to break into someone else's house rashly, right?" Michael sneered. "Annie Lee, don't think that you can show off in front of me just because you served my deceased mother-in-law. When Diana and I get married, this villa will be mine. What's inappropriate about me coming to my own home?" After that, his eyes fell on me, and he gritted his teeth and said, "Little bastard, did Diana tell you something? Why did she attack my family? If you don't want to kill her, tell her to stop immediately." Uninvited guests and chill. I was completely confused and had no idea what he was talking about, so I simply kept silent. But my silence seemed to anger him even more, and he took a few steps forward and reached out to grab me. At this moment, a deep voice came from the door. "Michael, did I ever tell you that you can do anything but don't be so reckless here?" Diana walked in from the door, her voice so cold that the air froze. Then, the man in black behind him stepped forward quickly and grabbed Michael's neck with almost no effort. Those men in black were Diana's private army. Each of them was as cold and ruthless as a corpse. I watched Michael's face quickly turn red. There were even bloodshot in his eyes, and he couldn't help but touch his neck, as if he also felt the suffocation. Michael struggled, but there was no room for resistance. He made a painful ugh sound, which became smaller and smaller until he collapsed completely, and the man in black let go of his hand. He fell to the ground, gasping for breath, with fear written all over his face. Diana looked at him coldly, without a trace of emotion in her eyes. "Michael, I can pretend that I didn't hear what you said today. But if there is a next time, you should know the consequences. Michael gritted his teeth and dared not say a word. He got up in a panic and glared at me fiercely before leaving. Michael was almost rolling his eyes at being pinched, but Diana's expression showed no sign of softening. I hesitated whether to say a few words on his behalf. It's not because I'm nosy, but because I know these people's style of doing things too well. They will never turn themselves in, but if the truth is exposed one day, I will be charged with sheltering the guilty. Thinking back to the month I was in jail last time, I get chills all over. It was the worst time of my life, and I don't want to experience it again, even if I use my toes to think about it. Just as I was struggling over whether to interrupt, a figure rushed in. It was Diana's confidant, Oscar. I breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that finally someone with more say than me appeared. "Miss, don't be impulsive," Oscar panted and urged. "A little impatience can ruin a big plan. Pull back from the brink." Diana looked back at Oscar, frowning slightly, obviously not wanting to listen to his advice. Her eyes were cold, and her voice was even colder. If someone dares not take my words seriously, then I have to teach him what the rules are. This sentence sent chills down my spine. At that moment, I realized I had to find a way to ease the situation. With a quick glance, he saw the pillar next to him. So he quickly thought of a way out and said, "The pillar. The pillar can bear the weight. If you scare William like this, even the pillar will collapse." Diana tilted her head slightly, as if she was attracted by my nonsense for a moment. I immediately lowered my head and pretended to be timid, not daring to look her in the eye, for fear that she would think I was talking too much, and the next second those men in black would pinch me so hard that my eyes would roll back. She slowly raised her hand, and the man in black immediately let go of Michael. Michael collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath, his eyes full of embarrassment and humiliation. New cohabitation life. After this incident, Diana simply moved into the villa. She seemed determined to dispel my fear of her, and even moved a lot of official business to the villa. When she was in a meeting, I was next to the study, holding her tablet and playing Candy Crush Saga. She occasionally looked up at me, with a hint of helplessness in her eyes, but more of a subtle indulgence. Gradually, I became less afraid of her. She was no longer as cold as before, and sometimes she would even smile, although that smile made me feel a little awkward. One day, after the meeting, we were the only two people left in the study. She leaned back in her chair and said in a low voice, "William, I will never hurt you, no matter who I hurt. Don't be afraid of me, okay?" This sounded familiar, and I nodded reflexively, but my body honestly took a step toward the door. Diana shook her head helplessly, obviously speechless about my defense. Midnight peeping. A few days later, I was sleeping soundly when I suddenly woke up because I had to pee. I opened my eyes dazedly and saw Diana sitting by the bed, hugging her knees and looking at me quietly. If this scene happened for the first time, I might have screamed in fear, but this was not the first time. I even suspected that she had a habit of watching people sleep at night. You don't sleep every night and get up so early during the day. How come you don't feel sleepy? I asked while rubbing my eyes. Diana was stunned for a moment, then raised her lips slightly. "Are you concerned about me?" I quickly waved my hands. "I'm not concerned. I'm just curious." The light in her eyes dimmed, and she whispered, "I can't sleep. Unsolved insomnia." Her words left me speechless for a moment. I don't know why, but seeing her like this, I actually felt a little guilty. Although she was usually strong and cold, at this moment, she seemed a little fragile. If you can't sleep, find something else to do. It's scary to sit here and watch people sleep. I tried to speak in a relaxed tone. She lowered her head, and her voice became even deeper. "I'm not bored. I just don't want you to think I'm scary." I was stunned, not knowing how to respond. Her words made me feel a little confused. Did she really care about what I thought? I suddenly thought of Diana in the past. She was someone who would quarrel with me, but always made me feel warm. And the Diana in front of me, compared with her coldness and toughness, actually had a touch of humanity. However, Diana has been acting very unlike herself lately. Even when I'm not at the conference table in the study, I can feel the tense and oppressive atmosphere. She seems to be urged by something and is desperately pushing forward various tasks. While looking at her back, I complained silently in my heart. "It's okay that you are so busy, but please don't disturb me because you can't sleep." Then, I touched my nose and got up to go to the bathroom. As soon as my feet touched the ground, my vision suddenly went dark. I was used to this kind of situation, so I forced myself to suppress the urge to vomit, slowed down my movements, and waited until my vision cleared before I walked out. When I came back, she was standing by the window, staring at the sea of tulips outside, as if in a daze. Do you still remember the first tulip that a yin gave you? She asked suddenly in a soft voice. I was stunned for a moment and tried to search my mind for the memory, but I finally shook my head. My memory has been getting worse recently. I can't remember it at all. She didn't say anything and continued to look out the window quietly. It's strange to say, Diana and a yin are two different people, but they look exactly the same. If I hadn't seen Diana every day, I would have almost forgotten what a yin looked like. I want to go back to Lushan Town. Thinking of losing contact with the yin, my heart was like a deflated ball. I sat limply on the bed, my mind flashing back to the countless times he had said, "Wait for me." But when would he come to pick me up? This uncertain wait made me irritable and helpless. Miss Lu, can you please let me go back to Lushan Town? I looked up at her with my last hope, pleading in my voice. Otherwise, what if he comes back and can't find me? Diana's expression changed slightly, and a trace of pain flashed across her eyes, but she quickly regained her composure. She slowly sat down on the bed, and her tone revealed a firmness that would not tolerate rejection. William, a yin asked you to wait for him here. He was worried that you would be in danger if you were alone in Lushan Town, so he asked someone to pick you up. My eyes widened immediately. Can you contact her? Diana nodded. Hearing this answer, I finally let go of my worries and smiled. That's good. As long as she is safe, I can wait as long as it takes. Ayan's secret. During the 6 months that Ayan was away, even when she returned to Lushan Town, she was busy day and night. I often heard her whispering on the phone while half asleep and half awake. I could guess the general idea by adding up the intermittent messages. Her biological mother died young, and her stepmother even plotted to kill her in order to let her biological son take the throne. Judging from the people who followed her later, her identity was obviously extraordinary. It was impossible for an ordinary worker to have so many powerful people protecting her. The Liu family is definitely not an ordinary wealthy family. The larger the family, the more complicated the power struggle. In order to be the heir, the other party has already cruelly killed her. If her whereabouts are known, I am afraid someone will hunt her down at any time. Thinking of this, my heart was heavy. He was running for his life, and all I could do was not to make things worse, at least to protect myself and wait for her to come and pick me up safely. The test of emotions. Diana's eyes swept over my face, and her tone was somewhat tentative. If she did something to let you down, would you still wait for her? Without even thinking, I retorted, Impossible. Ayen loves me so much. How could she do something to let me down? You don't understand our relationship. You are unfaithful to your relationship, so you think everyone is the same as you. Hearing this, her face froze slightly, and then she showed a half smile. Really? I hope you can always think so. I didn't take her words to heart, but when I thought about the way those people who came to the villa for meetings every day looked at me, I couldn't help feeling helpless. They almost carved the 4 big words, "Blue friends are the source of trouble," on my forehead, as if all the troubles were caused by me. Michael's situation. Michael bullied me. From his perspective, his fiancée Diana broke off the engagement while still seeming to have an ambiguous relationship with me. Anyone would go crazy, right? Business marriages are all about profit, not love. Since she chose to get engaged to Michael, she should abide by the rules and profit from the marriage instead of putting him in such an insecure situation. Thinking of this, I felt mixed emotions. Although Michael was hateful, I understood the feeling of being misunderstood by the whole world better than he did. I always think that the exchange should be fair, just like me and Ian, who exchanged true love for true love. But the emotional entanglement between Diana and Michael is really a mess, and they have to involve innocent people like us. It's better to handle emotional matters properly and not let us outsiders take the blame, I said coldly. Diana's face faded and turned pale. She looked at me with a trace of confusion and pain between her eyebrows. After a long while, she whispered, "William, wait a little longer. In another half a month, I can end this." I didn't understand what she meant, but the indescribable sadness in the air made me feel suffocated. The increasingly mixed emotions. I used to think Diana was a cold-hearted person, but after spending time with her these days, I found that she was not what I thought at first. Although she was cold, she still had some traces of tenderness. As the days passed, I found that my physical condition was getting worse and worse. I often walked unsteadily, and even my vision and hearing became blurry. I also had more frequent nausea and vomiting. I guessed it might be the sequelae of the concussion caused by the previous hit on the head, so I decided to start resting well. So my life became never get out of bed if I can lie in bed, going to bed early at night, and getting up late in the morning. This kind of life is comfortable and boring, and Diana has been so busy lately that she is rarely seen. Even at home, she is busy from morning to night. She didn't pay much attention to me, just thinking that I was bored and was sleeping to kill time. Forced birthday party. One night, she suddenly told me that she was going to hold a birthday party for me next week. I was stunned, then looked down at the calendar, and it was that day. But I didn't like such high-profile things, so I thought about declining. But Diana didn't seem to be planning to listen to my opinion. She just said calmly, "This birthday party is very important and must be held." For this purpose, she even called a team to put makeup on me. No matter how I resisted, I was finally pressed on a chair and painted, and my whole body was completely renewed from head to toe. The banquet was held in the villa. When Diana and I walked into the banquet hall, all eyes were on us. Diana took my arm and instantly became the focus of the whole place. And I became the focus of the focus. There were a lot of people in the hall, and I swallowed nervously. Diana seemed to sense my uneasiness, and she smiled and whispered, "Don't be afraid. After today, no one will dare to bully you anymore." Embarrassed Michael. Michael stood in the middle of the crowd, surrounded by a group of people. When he saw Diana, a smile immediately appeared on his face, and he took the initiative to come over and talk to her. But Diana didn't even give him a glance, and the scene was very awkward for a while. I secretly glanced at Michael's neck and found that the scary bruises from being pinched that day had completely disappeared, but his voice was a little hoarse, probably because his vocal cords were injured. The scene of that day came to my mind, and even my neck began to ache. If a yin dared to treat me badly, I would go to him to talk, and it would be useless even if he knelt down to apologize to me. Thinking of this, I suddenly felt that I had become a little sentimental recently, and even felt a little sympathy for Michael. I need to ask the doctor if the sequelae of a head hit can still make one feel more compassionate. The nosy Madonna. Seeing Michael's face getting uglier and uglier, I leaned close to Diana's ear and lowered my voice and said, "I don't care about the cuckolding. I'm offering you a way out. Don't be so arrogant. Besides, I heard you guys are getting married in 2 months. If you can't get over this, how are you going to get along with each other in the future?" Diana heard this. A hint of coldness flashed in her eyes. She raised the corners of her mouth slightly and said with a hint of mockery, "William, when did you start to care about him?" I choked and replied dryly, "It's not that I care, I just think there's no need for men to embarrass other men." Diana chuckled, but her eyes were not soft at all. "William, this is not your business." Her words shut me up instantly, but I couldn't help but wonder in my heart, what grudge did these two have that caused such a fuss? Was it just because of a business marriage? Halfway through the banquet, I found that Diana seemed to be pulling me in front of everyone intentionally or unintentionally. Michael stood not far away, staring at us, his eyes becoming more and more gloomy. The depressing atmosphere made me shiver. "Diana, are you doing this on purpose?" I asked her in a low voice. I leaned close to Diana's ear and lowered my voice to say something nice for Michael. "People don't care about your cuckoldry. They're offering you a way out. Don't be so arrogant. I heard you guys are going to get married in 2 months. If you can't get over this, how are you going to get along with each other in the future?" I thought she would say something impatiently to me, but unexpectedly she turned around and looked at me, her tone calm, but revealing an unquestionable pressure. "Then don't get married." These 3 short words were like thunderclaps from a clear sky, and I was completely stunned. But what she said next made me even more dumbfounded. "The wedding will go on as usual in 2 months, but the groom will be you." Her voice was not loud, but it was like a bomb dropped into the banquet hall, setting off a huge wave. There was an uproar all around, and all eyes were on me, with shock, anger, contempt, and a bit of inexplicable excitement. The grudge behind. Everyone knows that Diana was able to return to the Liu family and gain a foothold because of her marriage to Michael. With the full support of the Lin family, she is qualified to compete with the current head of the Liu family. Diana was originally the heir raised by Mr. Liu. She had an impeccable family background and was trained as the head of the family since she was a child. However, her half-brother Liu Heir Xiao has always been eyeing her position. When Diana disappeared, Liu Heir Xiao became the only candidate for the Liu family. During the years when Diana was away, the second young master Liu took steady steps and successfully took control of the power of the Liu family. After Diana returned to Kyoto, she had to carefully hide her whereabouts and rely on the support of some aristocratic families to return to the stage. When she found Michael, He agreed to help her seize power on the condition that they get married. Hostility. At this time, Diana's decision obviously touched everyone's bottom line, especially those old officials of the Liu family. They were all furious and stared at me with hostile eyes, as if they were looking at an outsider who deserved to die, and they wished that I would be a widow. I could feel the oppression in the air, as if the entire banquet hall had become a place of execution, and I was the prisoner standing in the center. Michael sent me to prison for intentional injury. Those days were as long as hell, and every minute and every second was torture. Thinking about it now, it still makes me feel cold. Their support for Diana and Michael's marriage was actually equivalent to supporting Michael. If the marriage broke down and Michael got angry and attacked me, these people would not only not stop him, but would even stand on his side and cheer him on. My existence is nothing more than an insignificant accident to them, or even a chess piece in the way. Panic and loneliness. My heart suddenly panicked, and fear surged into my mind like a tide. I tried hard to control my body and appear calm, but my head started to feel dizzy and my stomach was churning. I covered my mouth, trying hard to suppress the urge to vomit, for fear that any sound would anger those who were eyeing me covetously. Diana chose to marry Michael in order to consolidate her position. She needed the support of the Lin family, and this marriage would also allow her to smoothly control the power of the Liu family. But now, my appearance has obviously changed her plan. I instinctively looked around with my peripheral vision, trying to find a figure in my heart, hoping for a little comfort and support. But there was nothing around. At this moment, the big screen in the banquet hall suddenly lit up, and the picture clearly showed a cooperation agreement. There was a burst of exclamations from the crowd, and the guests looked sideways, obviously shocked by the content of the agreement. I was completely confused and couldn't understand the terms on the screen at all, but I caught some key words from the whispers around me. This was an opportunity that the Liu family had been waiting for more than 10 years, and its importance to the Liu family far exceeded any marriage. Before I could react, the door of the banquet hall was flung open and several policemen walked in. Diana stood up calmly with a stern face, handed a stack of evidence to the police, and said coldly, "This is evidence that Michael deliberately pushed my fiancé William down the hillside. As a family member of the victim, I hope the police will impose a severe sentence and refuse to accept reconciliation." Michael's breakdown. Michael's face turned pale instantly, as if his disguise had been torn off in public. He looked at Diana in disbelief and said in a hoarse voice, "Diana, how could you do this to me?" Diana's eyes were cold, and she didn't waver at all. "Michael, I just did what I should do." The police got the evidence and immediately restrained Michael. He struggled violently and tried to resist, but to no avail. Just before being dragged out the door, he suddenly turned around, his eyes full of resentment. He stared at me, his tone sharp and crazy. "William, are you really amnesiac? Or are you pretending to be amnesiac? What do you want? To win her sympathy, or to make her feel distressed?" He struggled and continued shouting. "Do you think Diana will be loyal to you? She abandoned you once for power, and she will do it a second time. An orphan without any foundation can only be her tool." At that moment, the corners of his eyes turned red, and his tone was full of anger and resentment. His crazy screams were like a blunt knife, cutting through my mind over and over again. A vague fear. Diana's face became a little flustered, and she quickly walked in front of me, trying to block Michael's malicious words. She held my hand tightly and said anxiously, "William, don't listen to him. He is deliberately trying to stir up trouble between you and me." But Michael's voice has taken root in my ears, like a ghost. I want to shake off Diana's hand, but because of the sharp pain in my head, my movements are slow and weak. "Don't listen to him," Diana repeated in a low voice, her voice gradually choking. But I couldn't hear what she was saying anymore. The stabbing pain in my brain gradually spread, like thousands of needles piercing my nerves. I pounded my head hard, hoping to relieve the pain that seemed to be splitting apart, but it was still useless. Finally, my eyes went black, and I completely lost consciousness. Vague memory. When I woke up again, it was already evening. The sunset outside the window dyed the sky red, and the air was filled with a quiet and deserted atmosphere. I stared at the ceiling, my mind automatically replaying the scene before I fainted, Michael's crazy shouting, Diana's panicked eyes, all embedded in my mind like fragments. The memories were a mess, but some of the images were unusually clear. That was my first day in Kyoto. Antley stood at the door of the villa, holding a basket of freshly bought vegetables. She looked at me and sighed with some distress. Master, you always call her Diana, but do you know? Her full name is Diana. Diana. I repeated the name, feeling both strange and familiar. Motherly nodded, with a hint of nostalgia in her tone. Diana's mother was in poor health, and I was the one who brought her up since she was a child. Later, I followed my wife into the Liu family and continued to take care of her. Diana was very well behaved when she was a child, always protecting those around her. But later, the Diana you remember. Questions. Lying in bed, my mind was filled with questions. Who was Diana? Who was Diana? Why was my memory so confused that I couldn't tell the difference between the two? Michael's words were still ringing in my ears. His questions and ridicules were like needles piercing my heart. I began to doubt whether Diana's sincerity was real or not. Her tenderness and indifference, her firmness and contradiction, which side was real? I had never left the mountains and waters of Lushan town until Diana brought me to Kyoto. The bright lights of this city made me feel strange and cramped, as if the whole world was reminding me that I didn't fit in here. This is my mother's dowry, and it's also where I grew up. Diana took me to the villa halfway up the mountain and said softly, "You just need to stay here with peace of mind and don't worry about anything else." I originally thought this was a safe haven, but when I found that I couldn't even get out of the villa, my inner anxiety gradually grew. She told me that it was dangerous outside, that the situation was not stable yet, and that I would be in trouble if I went out. At that time, I chose to believe her. A phone call. Until one day, Michael's call broke my peace. On the other end of the phone, he scolded me in a tone full of sarcasm and anger. "Are you so shameless that you are willing to be Diana's secret lover and interfere in our relationship?" I was so angry that I responded on the spot, but after hanging up the phone, the suspicion in my heart grew like weeds. His words made it impossible for me to ignore every detail since I entered this villa. Diana protected me and isolated me from the outside world. In her life, I was like a secret that must not be seen. I wanted to have a good talk with her, but she always made excuses and even changed the subject. Until one day, I forced her to give me an explanation, and she finally stopped hiding it. Power game. My father, stepmother, and my family, and I were fighting to the death. Diana looked at me with a hint of fatigue in her eyes. She told me that her stepmother and half-brother had teamed up to take away everything from the Liu family. In order to regain her position, she had to use the power of the Lin family. She also told me that her engagement with Michael was just a temporary measure, and she would cancel the engagement as soon as the situation stabilized. "Once I have stabilized the situation, I will take you away." There was a hint of pleading in her voice. But this is not what I want. Her words made me feel strange. The Diana in front of me was no longer the Diana who would accompany me under the eaves to avoid the rain, but a stranger wrapped in power and revenge. "I just want to go back to Lushan town," I whispered. Hearing this, her expression instantly became flustered and angry. She did not allow me to leave and used all means to trap me in the villa, even restricting my freedom. I became a bird with broken wings, locked in a golden cage, and could never fly out again. Escape and calculation. Later, I finally found a chance to escape from the villa. But before I got far, I ran into Michael. He taunted me like a prey, and finally filed a lawsuit to send me to prison. During that period, every day was like purgatory. When I was finally released, Diana took me back to the villa. But her supervision of me became more severe. Whether it was for protection or control, I felt suffocated. There was guilt and reluctance in her eyes, but more importantly, there was unquestionable determination. "I'm doing this for you, William," she said, her voice soft but irresistible. I know her position, and I know she has no choice. Whether it's for power or for her mother's injustice, she can only move forward. However, I also know that the rift between us has long been irreparable. Determined to leave, the Lin family's affairs were finally over. Diana became the head of the Liu family as she wished, but I could not find any comfort in her eyes. "Diana," I asked her tentatively, "if this is all over, will you let me go?" She didn't answer, just remained silent. At that moment, my heart was completely cold. She wanted to keep me, but was unwilling to give me freedom. The person who once made me feel warm has now become a prisoner in my life. The sudden truth. That day, I got up from the bed, resisted the nausea, and walked out of the room. From a distance, I saw Diana talking to the doctor intensely. She didn't notice me, so I leaned against the door and listened quietly. The doctor's words made me feel like I was falling into an ice cellar. The condition has worsened. It has been confirmed to be a brain tumor in the late stage. I can only live for a month at most. My heart suddenly shook, and the reasons for all the nausea and headaches became clear at this moment. It turned out that all this was not the sequelae of concussion, but the final judgment of fate on me. In a flash, Diana's eyes fell on the door and saw me standing there. Her excited tone suddenly stopped, and the corners of her mouth raised a smile, but I felt that her expression was a little weird, even a little disturbingly nervous. Before I could open my mouth, the stabbing pain in my head suddenly intensified. My vision began to blur, and I instinctively covered my forehead with my hands, trying to relieve the pain that seemed to be splitting. But even though I banged my head hard, I still couldn't resist the dizziness that came over me. Eventually, everything went black, and I completely lost consciousness. Memories of Kyoto. When I woke up, it was already evening. The afterglow outside the window poured into the room, and the curtains were gently blown by the wind, bringing a hint of chill. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, and my mind automatically replayed the scene before I fainted. Diana's strange expression, excited words, and the doctor's frown. Then, more memories emerged like scattered fragments. Many things are already blurry, but I remember clearly the first day in Kyoto. It was the first time I left Lushan town and came to this bustling city that made people breathless. The villa was my mother's dowry, and it's where I grew up, Diana told me. It's the safest place. You just need to stay here and don't worry about anything else. Her tone was so gentle that it was hard to refuse, but later I realized that it was just a cage woven with gold wire. When I first arrived at the villa, I couldn't even get out of the door. She told me that the situation outside was very chaotic, and it would be dangerous for me to go out before things were handled. Doubts after a phone call. At first, I chose to believe her, until one day, my phone suddenly lost its connection to the internet, and I received a call from Michael. "William, you are so good. You hide in the villa and pretend to be affectionate. But in fact, you are just the third party between me and Diana." His tone was full of sarcasm and anger. I was furious when I heard this, and I immediately retorted. But after I hung up the phone, I had doubts in my heart. His words were like a thorn, constantly reminding me. Since I came to Kyoto, have Diana's various actions really been just to protect me? I tried to talk to her about it, but she was vague and evasive every time. It was not until I aggressively asked her to explain that the truth gradually surfaced. A helpless stopgap measure. "William, you don't understand." Diana rubbed her temples and looked at me with complicated eyes. "My father, stepmother, and I have been fighting to the death. In order to regain control of the Liu family, I have no choice." There was fatigue in her voice. She told me that her mother died young, and her stepmother and half-brother took advantage of the situation to seize power and occupy everything that originally belonged to her. In order to regain control of the Liu family, she had to join forces with the Lin family, and her engagement with Michael was just a temporary measure. "Once I have stabilized the situation, I will divorce Michael." Her tone was firm, as if she was swearing. But this is not what I want. Her explanation made me feel at a loss. She used to be the Diana who would laugh and joke with me, but now she has become so strange. "I want to go back to Lushan town." My voice was very soft, but every word was full of determination. Hearing this, her eyes suddenly became flustered. "No, bird in a golden cage." She used every possible means to force me to stay and keep my freedom firmly in her hands. She said it was to protect me, but I knew in my heart that it was more like a form of control. Michael outside. This man full of conspiracy easily plotted against me and sent me to prison with a piece of evidence. That month, I experienced humiliation and despair. After I was released from prison, Diana took me back to the villa, but she became more strict in her supervision of me. My life was completely imprisoned, like a bird in a cage, unable to break free. Although I was full of resentment, I also understood that she had no other choice. Whether it was for power or to avenge her mother, she had no choice but to take this path. Life or death. I don't want to force her to make a choice anymore. Since she needs to fight for revenge, I am willing to choose to quit. I thought I could be free, but my body told me that maybe freedom doesn't come from it. Recently, my headaches and nausea have become more and more severe, and even standing up will cause blacking out. I thought it was the sequelae of a concussion, but I didn't expect that the truth was far more cruel than I imagined. The cruel truth. After I got over the nausea, I stood up and walked out of the room. From a distance, I saw Diana and the doctor talking intensely. Her face was more tense than ever, while the doctor's expression was a little helpless. The situation is very clear. The doctor's voice was low. It was confirmed to be a brain tumor in the late stage. There is only 1 month at most to live. My body froze. Brain tumor late stage, only 1 month left. These cold words exploded in my ears like thunder. I leaned against the wall, trying to adjust my breathing and calm myself down. Diana's voice rang out again. Is there no other way? Surgery, chemotherapy, no matter what the cost. I'm willing to try. The doctor sighed. Sorry, the best time for treatment has been missed. Smile and farewell. I stood by the door, listening to their conversation, with a wry smile on my face. At this moment, I felt neither sad nor desperate, but rather much more relaxed. When I turned around, Diana's eyes met mine. Her tone stopped instantly, and the excitement on her face turned into panic. William, she walked quickly to me, trying to hide her inner anxiety. Why are you standing here? Are you feeling unwell? It's okay. I smiled, my voice calm. I just feel that time is running out, and something should be made clear. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she said nothing. The last freedom. After returning to the room, I leaned on the bed and looked out the window at the night sky. The end of life, maybe a new beginning. I can finally let go of everything in the past, no longer entangled in this golden cage, and no longer entangled in Diana's feelings. Death is not scary, it is my freedom. The moment I closed my eyes, my heart was unexpectedly calm, and I even looked forward to that day.